Imagine being told your entire world, everything you've ever known, was about to be wiped out by an enemy you didn't even know existed. That's exactly what happened on a perfectly normal Tuesday, but for one small problem, nobody bothered to tell us. High above our planet, a fleet of alien warships from the Valoran Dominion, the galaxy's biggest bullies, was getting ready to attack. Their commander, a tyrant named Lord Vexeron, looked down at our beautiful blue home and sneered. "What a tiny little world," he said to his second-in-command, "and it's filled with such primitive creatures." You won't believe how this story of injustice turns into the ultimate underdog tale, so stick around to see what happens next. "This should only take a few days tops," his officer Krath agreed. "The council sent them a warning, my lord. We never got a response." Lord Vexiron let out a cold, chilling laugh. "Maybe they're too scared to answer," he wondered aloud. "Or maybe they're just too dumb to realize what's coming. It makes no difference. Start the invasion. Send our flagship to their largest city. It's time we showed these creatures what real power looks like." But light years away, on a space station called Nexus Prime, the so-called Galactic Council was in session. This group, made up of dozens of alien species, was supposed to keep the peace. In reality, they were just a bunch of politicians looking out for number one. The council was run by High Arbiter Sana, an ancient being made of living, glowing crystal. She'd seen civilizations rise and fall for thousands of years, and to her, Earth was just another footnote in history. "The Valoran Dominion is beginning its pacification of the human world," she announced, her voice echoing through the grand hall. "As we agreed, they will bring the humans under proper galactic authority." But one ambassador, a creature with tentacles named Clith Varan, shifted uncomfortably. "High Arbiter," he interrupted, "if I may, the humans haven't provoked anyone. They've done nothing to deserve this." "They exist in a sector the Dominion has claimed," Sana replied, her tone icy. "According to our laws, that's all the justification they require. Besides, they're just a level 2 civilization. They've barely managed to land a few robots on their own moon. They're not a threat to anyone, and frankly, they'll probably be better off under the Dominion's management." "But what if they resist?" Clith Varan pushed back. Sana's crystal body flared with a cold light. "Then they will learn the cost of defiance, just like every other primitive race that came before them." Not one other person in that chamber said a word. Some agreed with her, but most were just too terrified of the Dominion to defend a planet they'd never even heard of. And just like that, as the entire galaxy looked the other way, our world's final chapter began. The first Valoran ship tore through Earth's atmosphere at exactly 11:47 a.m. Eastern Time. It was an absolute monster, nearly a mile long and shaped like a giant curved dagger. Its dark metal body was covered in weapons, and its shields could stop anything the galaxy could throw at it. It moved slowly, intentionally, as it descended upon New York City. The Valorans weren't just attacking, they were making a statement. They wanted us to see them coming. They wanted us to be terrified. And boy, were we. Millions of people stopped dead in the streets, just staring up at the skiste. They watched this impossible shadow block out the sun, felt the bone-deep hum of its engines, and smelled the strange burnt ozone scent of technology from another world. But fear wasn't the only thing in the air that day. Deep inside the Pentagon, generals were crowded around monitors, watching the alien ship with disbelief. The President of the United States was on a video conference, his face ghostly white, but his voice steady. "What do we have," he asked, "that can even put a scratch on that thing?" General Morrison, a woman with iron gray hair and a gaze to match, just shook her head. "Sir, our military wasn't designed for this. Our best missiles would just bounce right off its shields." But then a quiet voice spoke up from the back of the room. "Then maybe we should hit them with something that isn't a weapon," said a young officer named Lieutenant Chen. Until that morning, he was just a guy who managed satellite communications, something they would never expect. "What are you talking about, Lieutenant?" Chen quickly displayed a file on the main screen. 3 months ago, we put a new satellite into orbit. It's equipped with industrial-strength mining lasers, meant to break apart asteroids to gather resources. The lasers are incredibly powerful, but they've never once been tested for combat. General Morrison looked doubtful. Can we even aim it at a moving target from space? I'm not sure, ma'am, Chen confessed, but I think I know the person who can. Hundreds of miles away, in a small apartment in San Francisco, a brilliant engineer named Dr. Sarah Park was watching the news, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had personally helped design that satellite's aiming software. At that exact moment, her phone rang. A serious voice on the other end said the world needed her to prevent its extinction. She didn't pause for a second. "Just tell me where to start," she said. What followed was the most chaotic 36 hours in human history. While that Valorant beast hung over New York like a death sentence, thousands of scientists, engineers, and soldiers worked around the clock, fueled by coffee and sheer terror, to turn a simple mining tool into a planet killer. The challenges were staggering. The laser wasn't built for fighting, the targeting system was hopelessly slow, and the power core could only handle firing for a couple of seconds. But we humans have a superpower the Valorants didn't know about. We are incredibly stubborn. We do not give up. Dr. Park rewrote the entire targeting code in 12 hours, typing so furiously her fingers went numb. Lieutenant Chen coordinated the global effort, linking the satellite to military command. Some kid in Japan figured out how to boost the power supply using a trick he learned from building high-end gaming computers. A retired engineer in Germany solved a critical overheating issue with a design he drew on the back of a napkin. This wasn't a polished professional army. This was a messy, exhausted, brilliant collection of ordinary people from all over the globe doing the impossible because they had no other option. Aboard the Valorant ship, the officers reported that the humans were offering zero resistance. No missiles had been fired. No fighter jets had scrambled. "It seems the primitives are accepting their fate," one of them noted. "Just as I foresaw," Lord Vexiron boasted. "They know they are powerless against us." "Get ready to broadcast our demands," he ordered. "Inform their leaders they have 1 hour to surrender without conditions, or we will vaporize their cities." But Lord Vexiron couldn't have been more wrong. We weren't surrendering. We were aiming. At exactly 1:23 p.m. on Thursday, a full 48 hours after the invasion started, Dr. Sarah Park took a deep breath and pressed the enter key. 300 miles above the planet, a satellite built to slice up rocks in space turned its lens and focused its laser on the alien warship. The beam itself was invisible to the naked eye, but its effect was anything but. The Valorant shields, designed to repel energy blasts and physical objects, had never encountered this exact frequency of superheated light. The laser cut through the shields like they were made of tissue paper. On the bridge of the warship, alarms shrieked and officers yelled in confusion. Lord Vexiron watched in total disbelief as a glowing red hole melted through the ceiling of his command center. Then another one appeared, and another. "What is going on?" he roared. "What are they hitting us with?" "It's a weapon of unknown origin, my lord," an officer screamed. "Our shields are having no effect." "That is not possible," Vexiron bellowed. But it was possible. It was just something they hadn't planned for, and that was only the beginning. The laser beam, guided by Dr. Park's frantic typing, pierced the ship's main power core. The explosion was so bright it turned the afternoon sky into a second sun. That massive ship, the crown jewel of the Valorant fleet, fell from the sky like a broken bird. It crashed into the Atlantic Ocean about 30 miles from the coast, kicking up a giant wave that, by some miracle, didn't cause any serious damage. For a few long seconds, the entire world was silent. And then, in every city and every town, people began to cheer. Back on Nexus Prime, the news of the ship's destruction sent shockwaves through the Galactic Council. High Arbiter Sana immediately called an emergency meeting, her crystalline body flickering with agitation. "Someone explain this to me," she demanded of her staff. "How did a primitive species manage to destroy a Dominion dreadnought?" A small, lizard-like officer pulled up the data. "It seems they turned a mining satellite into a weapon, High Arbiter. The laser's unique frequency wasn't in any of our military databases. Our shield technology had no defense against it. And how long did this retrofitting take? Sana asked, her voice tight. Roughly 36 of their local hours, High Arbiter. Sana was stunned into silence. In all her thousands of years, she had never seen a species innovate so quickly under extreme pressure. The Valorans had taken centuries to perfect their shield technology. The humans had found a way to beat it in less than 2 days. This changes nothing, she finally announced, though her voice had lost its usual certainty. One lucky shot won't win them the war. The full Dominion fleet will still overwhelm them. But Ambassador Clith Varen wasn't so sure. He had been studying humanity for years, fascinated by these chaotic, unpredictable creatures from the far edge of the galaxy. He had studied their culture, their art, and their science, and he discovered something that the High Arbiter and the Dominion completely failed to grasp. You never see humans at their most clever or their most lethal until their backs are against the wall. Down on Earth, a woman named Admiral Chen addressed the United Nations. She was a petite woman with short gray hair, but her gaze missed nothing. Just weeks before the invasion, she'd been planning her retirement. Now, she was responsible for the defense of an entire world. "We won the opening skirmish," she stated, her voice calm and unshakable. "But this war is a long way from being over. The Dominion has hundreds of other ships. We only managed to take down one. Now, they'll be furious, and they'll be much more cautious. We can't count on the same trick to fool them again." "So what is our next move?" the Chinese representative asked, his voice strained with tension. "We do what humanity has always done," she answered. "We adapt, we get creative, and we simply refuse to be wiped out." A map of the world lit up the screen behind her. Effective immediately, every factory on this planet is now producing weapons. Every engineer is a weapons designer. Every scientist is focused on finding a way to strike back. We don't have the luxury of time to build a conventional army, so we'll have to build an unconventional one. "That's not a strategy," the Russian representative retorted. "That's pure desperation." "Yes," Admiral Chen agreed, her eyes like chips of flint. "It absolutely is, but desperation is an emotion humans know intimately, and it's something our foes don't understand in the slightest." She looked out at the faces of the planet's leaders, seeing a mix of terror, hope, and sheer grit staring back. "The Valorans believe they have us all figured out. They view us as fragile, primitive, a simple conquest. They are about to get a very rude awakening." Thousands of miles above, in the dead quiet of space, Lord Vexeron gazed at the debris of his lost warship and felt a sensation he hadn't known for centuries: uncertainty. The humans had taken him by surprise. That was not supposed to happen. He opened a communications channel to his entire fleet. "All vessels, prepare for a full-scale onslaught. There will be no more warnings. There will be no more mercy. Burn their cities from orbit. Shred their satellites. Annihilate them." His officers responded with a chorus of bloodthirsty cheers. They were desperate for payback for their fallen shipmates. They didn't feel the same new sense of doubt as their commander. They were still convinced victory was inevitable. They couldn't have been more wrong. For the next 7 days, the Valoran fleet pounded Earth with everything in its arsenal. They showered cities with plasma fire, leveled military installations, and shot satellites from the sky. They took millions of innocent lives and scarred the face of the planet for generations to come. But they did not conquer Earth. They weren't even close. Because every single time the Valorans thought they understood human tactics, the humans rewrote the entire playbook. Every time they developed a defense for a human weapon, the humans came up with something brand new. Every time they obliterated a human stronghold, the humans simply set up another one somewhere else. The humans fought with modified mining lasers and passenger jets turned into bombers. They used computer viruses and hijacked the enemy's own communication systems. They used brilliant traps, deadly ambushes, and even kamikaze missions. They fought with weapons no Valoran could have ever conceived of, because no Valoran had ever been pushed to the edge of extinction needed to invent them. A farmer in Brazil rigged his crop-dusting drone to drop explosives onto a Valoran landing craft. A crew of teenage hackers in Ukraine broke into the Valorant comms and broadcast fake commands, tricking two of their capital ships into colliding. A physics student in India discovered a way to disrupt Valorant transporters using equipment she scavenged from a local hospital. By themselves, none of these small attacks were a major blow, but all together, day in and day out, they began to take a serious toll. The Valorants lost a ship in one sector, a shuttle in another, an entire platoon of soldiers somewhere else entirely. Their invasion began to lose momentum. Their arrogance started to fray. Their uncertainty began to fester. On the seventh day, Lord Vexeron received a report that sent a chill down his spine. He had begun this invasion with 50 capital ships. He was now down to 39. 11 ships just gone, lost to a species that didn't even possess a spacefaring fleet. 11 ships defeated by creatures the Council had dismissed as primitive. 11 ships eliminated by beings who should have been waving a white flag from day one. Lord Vexeron stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring down at Earth. The planet just continued its silent rotation, a defiant sphere of blue and green. Its people were still fighting, still falling, and still refusing to surrender. For the first time in his long and decorated career, he wondered if he had made a terrible, terrible miscalculation. And in homes, shelters, and hidden bunkers all across the globe, humanity looked towards the heavens and made a collective promise. They would not give in. They would not give up. They would fight until they were victorious, or until not a single person was left standing. Because that is what human beings do. It's what they have always done, and it's what they would continue to do. No matter how strong the enemy, no matter how hopeless the odds appeared, the galaxy made a monumental error when it underestimated Earth. And now, it was about to learn the true cost of that mistake. The war had just begun. 3 weeks had passed since the first shots were fired, and Earth was still standing. That simple reality was a shock to everyone in the galaxy who was paying attention. The Valorant Dominion had conquered dozens of worlds before, and none of them had lasted more than a few days. Earth was supposed to have been crushed in a matter of hours. Instead, it had become a persistent problem that refused to go away. On the Galactic Council station at Nexus Prime, the delegates gathered for yet another emergency session. These meetings had become a daily routine. What began as a simple mission to pacify a primitive planet had now spiraled into a much more alarming crisis. High Arbiter Solana presided at the head of the enormous round table, her crystalline form seeming to glow a little less brightly than usual. She hadn't gotten a decent rest in days. This Earth situation was causing problems she could have never imagined. "The latest intelligence from the Valorant fleet," she announced, her voice sounding exhausted. "They have lost another 11 ships in the past week. Their ground forces have been unable to establish any permanent beachheads on the planet's surface. The invasion is—" She paused, looking for the right word. "Stalemated," Ambassador Keithforn offered. His tentacles coiled and uncoiled slowly, a sign of intense focus for his people. "The invasion has ground to a halt, and every single one of us knows it." Councillor Threshneck of the Hegemony shifted his massive frame forward. His body was covered in thick gray plates of natural armor. His race was renowned for their military brilliance, and he had been studying the Earth situation with a professional's keen eye. "I have studied the humans' tactics," he rumbled. "They are unlike anything I've ever seen. They don't adhere to any known principles of warfare. They lack a coherent chain of command. They don't even use the same technology from one engagement to the next." "That sounds like utter chaos," another counselor remarked. "That should make them easy to defeat." "No," Threshneck corrected. "That's what I believed at first as well. I was mistaken. Their chaos is not a flaw. It is their single greatest advantage. Our strategies are effective because they are built on predictability. We anticipate what our opponents will do so we can prepare countermeasures. But with these humans, we cannot predict anything at all. Every single battle is unique. Every human seems to fight in their own way, with their own tools and their own strategies." "How is that even possible?" Solana asked. "How can an army function without a unified command structure?" "I do not know, but it is proving effective. The Valorans cannot adapt fast enough. By the time they develop a counter to one human strategy, the humans have already moved on to something else entirely. Ambassador Keverin projected a display of Earth. Red icons indicated Valorant positions, while blue icons showed suspected human resistance cells. The blue icons completely outnumbered the red. "There is another issue," he said. "The humans are absorbing our technology at a frankly terrifying rate. They managed to capture a damaged Valorant fighter during the first week. In a matter of days, they had reverse-engineered it. Within a week, they were constructing their own versions." "That is impossible," Solana stated, her tone absolute. "It takes decades to reverse-engineer advanced technology." "And yet they are doing it. Observe." He changed the display to an image of a human aircraft. It was a bizarre creation, a hybrid of human and Valorant components that looked like it shouldn't be able to fly. This image was captured 3 days ago over the European continent. It is a human jet powered by a Valorant engine and armed with Valorant weapons. Our intelligence indicates they put it together in less than 2 weeks. The council chamber fell completely silent. Every single delegate was having the exact same thought, but none of them had the courage to say it aloud. If the humans could figure out Valorant technology this quickly, what would happen if they ever got their hands on something even more sophisticated? Far below on Earth, the war continued to rage. In a classified bunker deep beneath the Swiss Alps, Admiral Chen was directing the global resistance. She hadn't slept for more than 4 hours a night since the invasion started and was running on pure adrenaline and coffee. All around her, scores of officers and technicians were riveted to their stations, monitoring enemy movements and guiding human forces. "We've got an update from the Asian front," an officer called out. "The Valorans are pulling out of Shanghai, claim the city's too hot to hold." "Excellent." "And South America?" the admiral asked. "It's a mixed bag. We lost Buenos Aires, but it cost them 2 more landing ships. They're paying in blood for every single inch of ground," the officer replied. Admiral Chenwei gave a grim nod. This was her entire strategy in a nutshell. Make every victory so painful for the Valorans that it felt like a loss. Humanity couldn't go toe-to-toe with their advanced tech, but they could bleed the mighty Dominion so badly that they'd eventually have to pack up and go home. The only question was whether eventually would arrive before they were all dead. Earth was bleeding out too. Cities were nothing but rubble. Millions were gone. Every resource was stretched to its breaking point. They couldn't keep this up forever. "Admiral," another voice cut through the noise, "a priority message from the Seoul Research Center. They're claiming a breakthrough." "What kind of breakthrough?" she demanded. "They say they can disrupt Valorant shields with a modified cellular signal. If it works, we could knock out their shields with gear you can carry in a backpack." For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Admiral Chenwei felt the corner of her mouth twitch into a small, determined smile. This was the one thing the rest of the galaxy never understood about humans. They weren't stronger than their enemies. As it turned out, humanity's ace in the hole wasn't being smarter in some academic sense. It was the ferocious, cornered animal creativity that the invaders could never have seen coming. And the first spark of that wildfire came from a 19-year-old college kid named Kim Ji-young. She was studying telecommunications when the sky broke open and her world ended. Huddled in a pitch-black basement while Valorant bombs turned her neighborhood to dust, she noticed something weird. Every time she tried to coax a signal from her phone, a piece of Valorant tech nearby would crackle and sputter. Anyone else might have written it off. But not Ji-young. She started playing with it, right there in the dark, armed with nothing but her phone and a desperate need to see the next sunrise. While the world burned outside, she figured out that certain cell frequencies, when layered just right, created a disruptive wave that the Valorant's supposedly perfect shields just couldn't handle. It wasn't a magic wand. The effect was weak, lasting only a couple of seconds, and you had to be close. But it was a crack in their armor, and a crack was all humanity needed. "Get Seoul to blast their research to every single lab we have left," Admiral Chenwei ordered, her voice like steel. I want this tech in the hands of our people across the planet by the end of the week." "Yes, Admiral." Meanwhile, half a world away in a sleepy little town in rural Kansas, a totally different kind of miracle was unfolding. Before the aliens showed up, Marcus Williams was a mechanic. For 20 years, his life had revolved around fixing cars, trucks, and tractors, solving real-world puzzles with grease on his hands. So when the invasion began, he did the only thing he knew how. He looked at the problem in front of him and started figuring out how to fix it. This particular problem was a crashed Valorant shuttle. A lucky shot from a human fighter jet had sent it spiraling into a cornfield just outside town. The alien crew was gone, but the ship was mostly in one piece. Before the Valorant recovery teams could find it, Marcus and his neighbors dragged the whole thing into an old barn and hid it under tarps. For the next 2 weeks, Marcus took it apart, piece by alien piece, trying to figure out what made it tick. He didn't have an engineering degree. He didn't have any fancy tools. All he had were his wrenches, a crowbar, and a stubborn pride that wouldn't let any machine beat him. "See this thing here?" he said to his helper, a former high school science teacher named Ellen. "I think it's their version of a fuel injector. Look at how these lines run to the engine." Ellen peered at a box the size of a car battery, covered in symbols that made her eyes cross. "How on earth can you tell?" "Just follow the plumbing," he said simply. "Fuel goes in here, some voodoo happens in the box, and the go juice comes out here to the engine. To be honest, it's not much different than a carburetor on a '67 Chevy, just a whole lot fancier." "Marcus, this is alien technology," she said, her voice full of awe. "It's supposed to be beyond our understanding." Marcus just grunted. "Everything's beyond us until it ain't. Now hand me that socket wrench." All around the world, scenes just like this were playing out. Farmers, factory workers, teachers, and teenagers, they were all prying open captured alien gear with whatever tools they had. Most of the time they found nothing, but every now and then someone got lucky, and every little discovery was another piece of the giant puzzle humanity was frantically trying to assemble. The Valorans were completely stunned. To them, technology was a sacred art, perfected by elite scientists over thousands of years. The idea that a bunch of nobodies could reverse engineer their most advanced hardware with nothing but common sense and elbow grease was, well, it was alien to them. Lord Vexerin stood on the bridge of his capital ship, staring at the latest damage reports. He'd never lost this many ships on a single campaign. He'd never fought an enemy that was so maddeningly unpredictable. "My lord," his tactical officer interrupted, "the humans have deployed a new weapon in the European theater. It appears to be momentarily disabling our personal shields." "How is that possible? Our shields are flawless." We don't know, my lord. Our engineers have looked at the captured devices, but they're a mess of primitive parts. They don't make any sense." Lord Vexerin slammed his fist onto the arm of his throne. "These creatures barely learned how to leave their own planet. How are they developing countermeasures for technology they shouldn't even be able to comprehend?" His officer just stood there in terrified silence. He had no answer. Back on the Valoran homeworld of Nexus Prime, Ambassador Keth Varen was having a very different kind of conversation with a sharp young aide. Her name was Thelvora. "I've been reviewing human history," Thelvora said, "trying to understand their mindset. I believe I've found something the Dominion overlooked." "And what's that?" "Humans have a unique relationship with war. Most species fight out of a logical need, using predictable strategies. Humans seem to treat it like a creative contest. They're always inventing bizarre new tactics, new weapons, new ways to surprise an enemy. Their entire history is just one long story of the little guy outsmarting the big guy." "This is known," Keth Varen said dismissively. "It's why they were flagged as a potential nuisance despite their primitive technology." "Yes," Thelvora insisted, "but there's more. Something I don't think the High Council truly understands." She pulled up a file. "When humans are pushed to the very edge of survival, their creativity doesn't just increase, it explodes. They become desperate, unpredictable, and far more dangerous. They try things that no logical race would ever dream of. They take risks that are, for all intents and purposes, suicidal. And every so often, one of those insane gambles actually works. Ambassador Keth Varen let that sink in. Are you suggesting that by invading their world, we've accidentally woken up our own worst nightmare? I'm saying, Thelvora replied, her voice low, that we decided to pick a fight with a species that specializes in pulling off impossible miracles. And now we're acting shocked that they're pulling one off on us. The Council will not be pleased to hear this. No, Thelvora agreed, but they have to, because if we continue on this path, I'm no longer sure that victory is guaranteed. Back on Earth, the fourth week of the invasion began with a massive Valoran assault on the Human Research Hub in Geneva. That facility was the brain of the global resistance, and the Dominion was determined to smash it flat. Admiral Chenwei was expecting them. She had prepared for this. But being prepared and winning are two very different things, and she knew that no matter what, the day would be paid for in blood. All units, hold your ground, she broadcast to the hidden defenders. Let them land, let them think we're scared, and then we'll give them a lesson in what true fear feels like. The Valoran strike force was 300 soldiers strong, with armored walkers and air support. It was more than enough to steamroll any human defense, at least that's what their commander thought. They touched down on the outskirts of the city and started their advance. The streets were dead silent, the buildings dark and still. It was as if the humans had already abandoned the city. The Valoran commander, a veteran named Jax Vorn, felt a knot tighten in his gut. In his long years of war, empty streets only ever meant one thing: a trap. He ordered his troops forward, but told them to be cautious. The first explosion erupted from a manhole cover, instantly vaporizing 5 of his soldiers. The second came from a third-story apartment window, shredding an armored walker with shrapnel. The third came from everywhere at once, as 100 hidden resistance fighters opened fire from rooftops, sewers, and shattered storefronts. Sure, the Valorans had the advanced ships and the laser guns, but we had something they didn't: Earth, and we defended it with everything we had. Construction workers fought with power saws, college kids threw homemade bombs, and office workers charged at armored aliens with sharpened pipes. It was ugly. It was chaos. It was a desperate, bloody mess, and we were actually winning. The alien commander, Jax Vorn, shrieked for air support, but our new homemade jammers sent his fighters crashing down. He begged for reinforcements, but we'd already turned the highways into mountains of rubble. He tried to signal a retreat, but it was too late. We had them completely surrounded. In just 2 hours, the entire Valoran invasion force was wiped out. Not a single alien soldier made it back. As the dust settled, Admiral Cheney walked through the ruined streets of Geneva. Human fighters, bloody and exhausted but alive, crawled out of their hiding spots. So many hadn't made it, and many more wouldn't survive their wounds. But they had won. "This was just one fight," she said, her voice heavy but strong. "We have to do this again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. We fight until they give up, or until we're all gone. Are you with me?" Every single person nodded. They were. They had to be. Meanwhile, back on the Valoran homeworld, news of the shocking defeat caused absolute panic in the government. The Valoran ambassador was screaming about honor and getting even, while the leader of the council tried to calm everyone down. But through all the noise, another ambassador, Keth Varen, sat in stone-cold silence. He remembered what a wise woman had once told him. The humans weren't just surviving, they were learning. They were getting smarter. With every battle, they figured out more about Valoran technology. With every passing day, they came up with new, wild strategies. They were becoming more and more dangerous. And a horrifying thought started to form in his mind. What happens when these humans stop defending their home and decide to come for ours? He didn't know the answer, but he knew that if it happened, the galaxy would never be the same. The war was just beginning. But somehow, against all logic, humanity was still in the fight, and as long as they were in the fight, they had a shot. That's all they ever wanted, a shot, and they were about to take it. 6 weeks after the invasion started, something happened that sent a shockwave of fear across the galaxy. A Valoran refueling station out near the Kepler travel lane suddenly went quiet. At first, the alien empire figured it was just a busted radio. Then, a remote mining colony went dark. After that, a military checkpoint stopped answering its calls. Lord Vexrin heard the news on the bridge of his capital ship, which was still floating in orbit above Earth. His face, already tired from weeks of frustration, turned ghost white. "Are you trying to tell me?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Wait, are you telling me the humans are attacking our deep space outposts?" The alien commander's intelligence officer gave a shaky nod. "It seems that way, my lord. We've lost all communication with 3 separate facilities in the last 48 hours. The very last message from Kepler Station was about unidentified ships right before they went silent." "That's ridiculous. The humans don't have starships. 6 weeks ago, they could barely get a satellite into orbit." The officer swallowed hard. "Well, my lord, it seems they do now." Lord Vex Aaron sank into his command chair, a cold dread washing over him. For the first time, he wasn't afraid of losing the war for Earth. He was terrified of what these scrappy little creatures could become if he failed to crush them. The incredible story of how humanity went from fighting for survival to taking the war to the stars began just 3 weeks earlier, in the fiery chaos above the Pacific Ocean. A Valoran cruiser, a ship called the Stellar Flame, had been badly damaged by human missiles. It wasn't completely destroyed, but it was crippled and falling out of the sky. The alien captain, trying to prevent his technology from falling into enemy hands, tried to crash it into the deep ocean. But the self-destruct system malfunctioned, and the ship hit the water mostly intact, right next to a small island in the Philippines. Within hours, the island was crawling with human Navy ships. The smartest engineers and scientists from 12 different countries were flown in. And for the next 2 weeks, while the war for their planet raged on, they worked day and night to figure out the alien ship's secrets. Leading this massive project was Dr. Elena Vasquez, a genius propulsion engineer who had dreamed of space her entire life. Never in her wildest dreams did she imagine she'd be standing on the bridge of a real alien starship. She was surrounded by tech that was supposed to be hundreds of years more advanced than anything on Earth. "This isn't magic," she told her team on the first day. "It just seems like magic because we don't know the science behind it yet. It still has to follow the laws of physics. Our job is to figure out those laws." It was a gigantic task. The alien computers operated on a logic that was completely foreign. The engines worked on principles that seemed to violate everything humanity knew about physics. The navigation system was designed for a species that could see in dimensions humans couldn't even comprehend. But piece by piece, Dr. Vasquez and her team started cracking the code. They discovered the faster-than-light drive didn't actually break the light-speed barrier. Instead, it bent space-time around the ship, creating a shortcut through the universe. It was an idea human scientists had only theorized about, but the Valorans had actually built it. The weapons were actually easier to understand. They were basically cannons that converted matter into beams of pure energy. The shields were just super dense pockets of space. The targeting systems could lock onto a ship from millions of miles away. It was all amazing, but it wasn't impossible to understand. "We can make this thing fly." Dr. Vasquez's exhausted voice crackled over the comms after 2 solid weeks of work. "The cockpit's built for something not quite human, but we can jury-rig it. Just give me 1 more week and I'll get her ready for the stars." Deep beneath the Swiss Alps, in her command bunker, Admiral Cheney read the message. For a long moment, she just stared at the data pad, the words blurring together. "They actually pulled it off," she breathed, a slow smile spreading across her face. Then, her voice firm, she commanded, "Patch me through to the United Nations on a secure line. It's time we had a little chat." That little chat lasted for 6 agonizing hours. Leaders from every nation on Earth argued, debated, and shouted over what to do with their incredible prize. Some argued to park it in orbit, a permanent shield for the planet. Others wanted to tear it apart, bolt by bolt, and reverse engineer the technology to build our own fleet. A few even floated the idea of using it as a bargaining chip, a way to sue for peace. But in the end, Admiral Cheney cut through the noise with a cold, hard plan. "Hiding behind a shield isn't a victory," she declared. "We can fend them off for 100 years and still lose everything that makes us human. Every single day this war continues. More of our people die, more of our cities are turned to dust. We have to finish this, and there's only one way I see how. We're taking the war to their front door." A heavy silence fell over the virtual room. Everyone knew the terrifying truth behind her words. For the first time in history, she was proposing that humanity stop defending and start attacking. "You're talking about sending our people deep into enemy space," the Chinese representative said, his voice tight with disbelief. "In a single stolen ship we can barely operate? That's not a mission, that's a death wish." "It might be," Admiral Cheney admitted without flinching, "but waiting here for them to glass our planet is also a death wish, just a slower one. This way, we have a fighting chance. This way, we get to make them hurt too." There was no arguing with her logic. The vote was unanimous. Humanity was about to hit back. Captain Maria Santos was without a doubt the best pilot Earth had. With combat experience on 3 different continents and more confirmed kills than any other flyer, she was a living legend. When they offered her command of humanity's first ever starship, she didn't hesitate for a second. "I'll need a crew," she told Admiral Cheney, her tone all business. "And not just any soldiers. I need people who know this is probably a one-way ticket and don't care. People who hate those things as much as I do." "You can have your pick of any volunteer," the Admiral replied. "The line to sign up is already a mile long." "I don't want eager volunteers," Santos countered. "I want the best. I want the innovators, the ones who can MacGyver a miracle out of spare parts and a prayer. I don't give a damn about their service record. I care about what they can pull off when everything goes wrong." The team she assembled was the strangest military unit ever formed. Yes, she had pilots and naval officers, but she also recruited a world-renowned mechanic, a genius-level hacker, a pro race car driver with an uncanny feel for engines, and a physics professor who hadn't left his university campus until the invasion began. Imagine your world gets invaded, your cities are turned to rubble, and you're left with nothing. What would you do? Well, for 200 survivors from 20 different countries, speaking a dozen different languages, the answer was simple: get even. They'd captured an enemy ship and gave it a new name, the Defiance. It took them another week to get it battle-ready, arming it to the teeth and figuring out all the alien controls. In that time, they managed to snag 2 more beat-up Valorant ships from other skirmishes. They were messes, but a little human grit got them back in the air. Now, they had 3 ships, with 200 crew members each. That's 600 people against an empire that spanned 100 worlds. The odds were a joke. But humanity has never been good at listening to the odds. On the day they launched, Captain Santos stood on the bridge of the Defiance, her voice echoing to the entire crew. "I'm not going to stand here and give you some big, flashy speech," she said, her tone rock solid. "You all know why we're here. You know what they took from us. Those aliens waltzed into our home and tried to wipe us off the map. They figured we'd just roll over and accept it. They thought we were weak." She let that hang in the air for a second, looking at the faces on her screen. They were scared, sure, but their eyes burned with a fire that was anything but weak. Well, it's time to show them just how wrong they were. We're taking the very ship they built, and we're going to use it to tear their empire down around them. We're going to make them regret the day they ever learned the word Earth. And if we don't make it back, then we go down swinging and we make them pay for every last soul they stole from us. A roar erupted from the crew. It wasn't a clean military cheer. It was a raw, primal scream of fury and hope all rolled into one. "All right, to your stations," Santos commanded. "We have a war to win." The 3 ships launched from hidden bases across the planet, blasting through the sky and into the dead of space. They formed up high above Earth, a tiny fleet staring down the massive Valorant armada still hanging in orbit. The alien commander, Lord Vexerin, saw them pop up on his sensors. He could have erased them from existence with a single order. His fleet outnumbered them at least 10-1, but he hesitated. Maybe it was a strange kind of curiosity. Maybe it was a tiny flicker of respect for a species that just wouldn't quit. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a cold sliver of fear that these little humans might actually be crazy enough to pull this off. For whatever reason, he let them pass. And that single decision would end up costing him everything. The Defiance and its sister ships, now named the Vengeance and the Fury, fired up their faster-than-light drives and winked out of existence. Their first target was a Valoran supply depot at the Kepler Transit Point, the main gas station for their entire invasion force. The base had some defenses, but they were light. The Valorans never dreamed anyone would be able to attack them this deep in their own territory. No one had ever gotten this close. Captain Santos dropped the Defiance out of hyperspace right on top of the station, so close the defenders didn't even have time to hit the panic button. A combination of captured alien energy cannons and human-made missiles tore through the station's shields like paper. "Light 'em up," Santos ordered calmly, "and make sure not a single distress call gets out." The entire battle was over in 12 minutes. The station was nothing but a cloud of fiery junk, along with the 3 patrol ships that tried to defend it. The Defiance had taken a few hits, but she was still very much in the fight. "That one was for New York," Santos whispered, watching the wreckage burn. For the next 2 weeks, the 3 human ships were like phantoms, hitting supply lines, communication relays, and military outposts all over Valoran space. For decades, humanity had been the galaxy's doormat, but those days were over. They were careful, no civilians, no one who wasn't actively shooting at them, but they were methodically taking apart the Dominion's war machine, one piece at a time. More importantly, they were broadcasting a message. Earth was done being a victim. Earth was hitting back. So what would you do if your home was under attack by a force you couldn't possibly beat? Would you surrender, or would you fight back with every last thing you had? On the capital world of Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council watched the news of the human counterattacks with a mix of shock and horror. "They've taken our ships!" the Valoran ambassador shrieked in an emergency meeting. "They're using our own technology against us. This is unacceptable. The Council must intervene." The High Arbiter, Sana, looked exhausted. "And what would you have us do? Mobilize our fleets? Start an even bigger war?" "Yes," he snapped. "Annihilate them! Scorch their planet before this gets any worse!" That's when Ambassador Keth Voron rose to speak. His tentacles were perfectly still, his voice calm, yet it silenced the entire room. "I must object to this proposal," he stated. "The humans have not attacked any member of this council. They have not harmed a single non-combatant. They are fighting a war of survival against an aggressor who invaded their home without provocation. If we attack them now, we become no better than the invaders themselves." The Valoran ambassador scoffed. "They are a danger to galactic peace." "No," Keth Voron corrected him smoothly. "They are a danger to the Valoran Dominion. Let us not confuse the two." He turned to the entire assembly. "We all made a grave error when we allowed this invasion to proceed. We dismissed the humans as primitive and effectively gave the Dominion our blessing to conquer them. We were profoundly wrong. They are not primitive," he went on. "They are simply different. And today we are all witnessing the cost of our collective arrogance." "What is it you are suggesting?" Arbiter Solana asked. "I'm suggesting we reconsider our position entirely. The humans do not desire galactic conquest. They simply wish to be left in peace. Perhaps it is time we grant them that wish." The chamber erupted into chaos. Some delegates voiced their support for Keth Voron, while others screamed that the humans had to be put down. The argument went on for hours, accomplishing nothing, and while the politicians argued, the crew of the Defiance was preparing for their most audacious mission yet. Captain Santos stared at the star charts on her main screen, her gaze locked on a world she'd only heard about in intercepted enemy communications. It was the Valoran homeworld itself, Nexar Prime, the very heart of the Dominion, the seat of all their power. "We don't have the firepower for a full-scale invasion," she said to her senior staff. "We can't win a straight-up fight, but we can wound them." We can show them that they aren't safe, not even in their own system. We can make them finally understand that this war will not end with our surrender. That's a suicide mission, Captain, her first officer stated bluntly. He was a former Russian submarine commander named Yuri Vulov, a man who had spent his entire life preparing for a war that had finally arrived. The odds of us returning are close to zero. Probably, Santos agreed without hesitation. But if we do this, if we actually strike their homeworld, it changes everything. They will never look at us as weak again. They will never underestimate us again. Santos looked around at the faces of her crew, her family, the 200 people who had chosen to follow her into the darkest corner of the galaxy. Are you with me? The response was immediate and unanimous. Of course they were with her. They had been from the start, and they would be there at the end, whatever it might be. The Defiance changed its course, pointing its nose toward Nexar Prime. Far away on a scarred and fighting Earth, people held on to a sliver of hope. The counterattack was underway, and the galaxy was about to be changed forever. The planet of Nexar Prime had never known war. For 12,000 years, the Valoran Dominion had always fought its battles on someone else's planet, far, far from its own shores. The Valorans believed their homeworld was a fortress, an untouchable jewel box in the cosmos. Down on the surface, they lived in glittering cities that pierced the sky, surrounded by art and music so beautiful it would make you weep. They built their perfect lives on the backs of conquered worlds, and went to sleep each night absolutely certain they were safe, protected by the most powerful military the galaxy had ever known. They were wrong. Their long, peaceful dream was about to shatter. The Defiance tore through the fabric of space at the system's outer rim, a ghost materializing just beyond the reach of their most advanced sensors. On the bridge, Captain Santos watched the distant star that warmed the heart of a corrupt empire. "Talk to me, Park," she said, her voice a low hum in the quiet bridge. Her tactical officer, a brilliant young woman from Seoul, Lieutenant Park, had her eyes glued to the console. "Captain, the system is locked down tighter than a drum. I'm painting no less than 50 capital ships in high orbit, and that's before we even count the weaponized platforms and satellite grids. Down below, every major city is wrapped in a planetary shield." "What about our primary targets?" Santos asked, her gaze unwavering. "Fleet Command is dug into the northern supercontinent. The main shipyards are parked in orbit on the far side, and their primary weapons lab is buried miles underground, right below the capital. Each one is a fortress within the fortress." Captain Santos allowed herself a small, grim smile. She expected this. The Valorans were thorough, but they were also predictable. They had built their defenses to stop a conventional fleet using conventional tactics. They had never, in a million years, designed them to stop a handful of desperate, unpredictable humans with nothing left to lose. "Signal the Vengeance and the Fury," she commanded. "Tell them to move into position. We go in 6 hours." The plan was beautifully simple and impossibly dangerous. The 3 human ships would hit 3 separate high-value targets at the exact same time, forcing the Valoran fleet to divide its forces. The Defiance would make a run at Fleet Command. The Vengeance would target the orbital shipyards. And the Fury had the craziest job of all: fly in loud, make a ton of noise, and draw as much fire as possible. It was a plan that required perfect timing, an insane amount of courage, and a whole lot of luck. Captain Santos stared at the star chart, knowing deep down that not all her ships, maybe not even her own, were making it home from this. This was a one-way ticket for some, a Hail Mary pass that could either save humanity or get them all vaporized. But if it worked, it would change the entire war. For 6 agonizing hours, the crews on all 3 ships ran their final checks, their hands gliding over weapon systems and shield controls one last time. They recorded messages for the families they'd left behind on Earth, whispering goodbyes to people a galaxy away. Some faced the silence with a grim calm, while others fought to steady shaking hands. but every single one of them knew that in a few hours their names would be written in the history books, one way or another. Then, right on schedule, the trap was sprung. The Fury slammed out of hyperspace, appearing in the heart of the enemy's main defensive fleet and unleashing hell on the nearest warship. The point wasn't to destroy it, just to make a whole lot of noise, and it worked like a charm. "We've got their attention," Lieutenant Park's voice crackled over the comms on the Defiance. "Roughly 30 ships are peeling off to engage the Fury. The planetary defenses are thinning out." "That's our cue," Captain Santos said, her voice steady as stone. "Full throttle to Nexar Prime. Let's make this a day they'll remember forever." The Defiance shot toward the planet like a railgun slug. Alarms screamed across the Valoran defense network as they finally realized what was happening. The warships left behind scrambled to intercept, but they were too slow, completely blindsided by the sheer suicidal audacity of the attack. On the bridge, First Officer Vulov watched the tactical display, a flicker of cold, professional admiration in his eyes. "They never dreamed anyone would be crazy enough to hit their homeworld directly," he murmured. "Their entire defensive grid is designed for a fleet battle, not a single ship on a suicide run." "Exactly why it's going to work," Santos replied sharply. "All weapons, fire at will, target fleet command." The Defiance's cannons, a bizarre cocktail of stolen Valoran technology and pure human desperation, came alive. Beams of energy and waves of missiles rained down on the military headquarters, covering the northern continent. The planetary shields flared, holding against the first volley, and the second, and the third. But these shields were built to stop conventional weapons. Dr. Park's new shield-disrupting technology, perfected over weeks of bloody trial and error, was anything but conventional. "Shield disruption is a go!" Lieutenant Park shouted over the din. "Their defenses are flickering." "Hit them again," Santos commanded. "Give them everything we have." The fourth barrage tore through the weakened shields like paper. Immense explosions ripped across the Fleet Command complex, shredding buildings and vaporizing infrastructure that had stood for 1,000 years. A deadly chain reaction ignited as munitions depots cooked off, sending fireballs rolling across the compound. Down on the surface, Valoran civilians looked up at the sky in sheer uncomprehending terror. This wasn't supposed to happen. The enemy wasn't supposed to be here. Their home was supposed to be untouchable. In the capital, Supreme Commander Thraxerin was watching the reports flood in, and a cold dread was seeping into his bones. He was the highest-ranking military officer in the Dominion, the sworn protector of the homeworld, and he was failing miserably. "How did one ship get through?" he roared at his terrified staff. "How did they bypass our entire network?" His tactical advisor stammered, "Sir, they don't fight by any rules we understand. They're chaotic, reckless. They take gambles no rational commander would ever even consider." "They're not gambling. They're insane," Thraxerin screamed. The advisor paused for a beat. "Perhaps, sir, but they are also winning." On the far side of the planet, the Vengeance was busy tearing the orbital shipyards to pieces. These colossal space stations were the heart of the Dominion's military power, the place where their unstoppable warships were born and repaired. Captain James Okonkwo, a former Nigerian naval officer who'd spent his life dreaming of this moment, stood on the bridge of the Vengeance. This wasn't quite the glorious command he'd imagined, but the dream felt real enough right now. "Concentrate all fire on the primary construction bays," he ordered, his voice echoing with authority. "If we gut their manufacturing, they won't be building any new fleets for a decade." The Vengeance's weapons turned the shipyards into a shooting gallery. Half-built dreadnoughts detonated in their cradles. Swarms of construction drones vanished in flashes of light. The massive structural supports groaned, then buckled, collapsing in on themselves and sending a blizzard of shrapnel spinning into orbit. "Multiple secondary explosions, Captain," his weapons officer cheered. "The shipyards are coming apart." "Excellent," Okonkwo said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Just excellent. Now get us out of here before their friends arrive." The Vengeance banked sharply, leaving the fiery ruin of the enemy's industrial might behind as it raced for the safety of deep space. A few remaining defense ships gave chase, but they were little more than angry gnats, too far and too slow to stop the human ship before it vanished into hyperspace. The Fury, however, was out of luck. Captain David Chen had known from the start that his mission was a sacrifice play. He'd signed up for it anyway, because his life and the lives of his crew was the price for the others' escape. Now, his ship was cornered, hammered by a dozen enemy warships. The shields were gone. The engines were dying. His crew, they were gone too. "Captain," his communications officer whispered, blood running down her face. "The Defiance and the Vengeance, they got away clear." A faint, weary smile touched Chen's lips. A piece of shrapnel was buried in his chest, and he could feel his own strength fading, but it no longer mattered. He'd done his duty. He'd bought them the time they needed. "Good," he breathed out. "That's all that matters." He tried to issue one last command. "All hands, prepare to—" But the words never came. The Fury's reactor core went critical, and the ship disintegrated in a silent, brilliant flash of light. Aboard the Defiance, speeding away from the carnage, Captain Santos saw the flash on her sensors. She squeezed her eyes shut for a single, painful moment, picturing the 200 souls who had just ceased to exist so that her own crew might live. "The Fury is gone," Lieutenant Park said, her voice thick with emotion. "I know. Plot a course for the rendezvous point. We need to find the Vengeance and bring our people home." "Captain, did we do it? Was it worth the cost?" Santos opened her eyes and looked back at the tactical map. Behind them, the enemy's capital, Nexar Prime, was in utter chaos. Their military command was a smoldering crater. Their orbital shipyards were a graveyard of twisted metal. Their legendary defensive fleet was scattered and broken, trying to make sense of the nightmare that had just unfolded. "Oh yeah," she said, her voice a low growl of grim satisfaction. "We did it. We hurt them. We hurt them real bad." Down on Nexar Prime, the news struck the Galactic Council like a thunderclap. "The humans, they struck Nexar Prime," High Arbiter Sana stammered, her crystalline body flickering with shock. "They attacked the Valoran homeworld. This is unprecedented. This is a declaration of total war." The Valoran ambassador shot to his feet, his face a twisted mask of rage and fear. "They must be exterminated. The Council must authorize a full-scale mobilization to wipe their species from the galaxy." "On what grounds exactly?" Ambassador Kethvan's voice cut through the chaos, unnervingly calm. "The humans attacked military installations, Ambassador. They were surgically precise, avoiding civilian casualties. They are, by all definitions, simply retaliating for the invasion of their own home. They are a plague on every civilized race in this galaxy." "No," Kethvan corrected gently. "They are a threat to the Valoran Empire. There is a very important difference." He rose slowly from his chair, his eyes scanning the faces of the stunned council members. "For months, I have studied these humans. I have watched this war, and I have come to a conclusion that many of you will find distasteful." "And what conclusion is that?" Sana asked. "They will not lose. They will never stop fighting. They will continue to adapt, to innovate, to invent new and terrifying ways to strike at anyone who threatens their existence. If this council commits to a war of annihilation, I guarantee you, they will find a way to make us all bleed. And even if we succeed in conquering their world, we will spend the next 1,000 years mired in an insurgency that will never, ever surrender." "Then what is your proposal?" "I propose we end this insanity now," Kethvan declared. "I propose we admit that sanctioning this invasion was a catastrophic error in judgment and take immediate action to correct it. I propose we offer humanity peace." The chamber erupted. Delegates were on their feet, some shouting in agreement with Kethvan's radical idea, others screaming for the humans' complete destruction before they could become an even greater threat. The debate raged for hours, tearing the council and the alliances that held it together apart at the seams. Meanwhile, back on Earth, what was left of the Valoran invasion force was utterly stranded. Lord Vexerin hadn't received a single transmission from his homeworld in Diz. His supply lines were gone. The promised reinforcements had been vaporized in the shipyard attack. He was trapped on a hostile planet, his resources were dwindling, and he was facing an enemy that simply refused to die. "Tell me our options," he demanded of his senior officers. They stood on the bridge of his flagship, the exhaustion from weeks of a brutal, losing campaign carved into their faces. "We can continue the fight," one officer offered weakly. "We still have 30 ships. We could inflict catastrophic damage on their population centers." "To what end?" Vexerin snapped back. "No reinforcements are coming. We cannot win this war. We can only choose how slowly we wish to die." Another officer cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could negotiate, my lord. Offer to withdraw if they return our captured ships and our people." A third officer just scoffed. "And why would the humans ever trust us? We stormed their home. We wiped out millions of them. They have absolutely zero reason to believe a single word that comes out of our mouths." Lord Vexerin collapsed into his command chair, completely silent. In his entire decorated career, he had never, not once, been in a situation like this. He was always the conqueror, the one who brought fear, the unstoppable tidal wave. Now, for the very first time, he was the one who was terrified. "Contact the human command," he finally ordered, the words tasting like ash. Tell them we want to discuss terms." That message traveled across the stars, finding its way to Admiral Chen Wei in her command bunker buried deep beneath the earth. She read it once, then again, and a third time, just to make sure her tired eyes weren't playing tricks on her. "They want to surrender?" her aide asked, his voice cracking with disbelief. "They want to negotiate," Chen Wei corrected him gently. "That's not the same thing." She paused for a long moment, thinking. "But it's a start. Tell them we'll meet, we'll talk, but make it absolutely clear that the only deal on the table is their unconditional and total withdrawal from our world, nothing less. And if they refuse, we keep fighting." She had shown them that humanity could strike back anywhere, even at the very heart of their precious empire. They knew now that this war wouldn't be the quick conquest they had planned. They knew that even if they managed to win, the cost would be astronomical. A cold smile touched her lips. "They're scared," she said. "And they should be." "We're just getting started." On Nexar Prime, Supreme Commander Thex Aaron stood among the shattered ruins of his fleet command, feeling the incredible weight of history pressing down on him. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Valoran homeworld had been successfully attacked. Their myth of being untouchable was gone, shattered into a million pieces. The Dominion would never be the same. And somewhere in that endless darkness between the stars, 3 beat-up human ships were limping their way home. They were damaged, their crews were a fraction of what they'd been. But they were victorious. They had pulled off the impossible. They had taken the fight to the conquerors, and the galaxy would never, ever forget it. 6 months had gone by since the invasion started. The war that the galaxy assumed would be over in a few days had morphed into something much bigger, far more complicated, and infinitely more meaningful. On Earth, the cities were slowly starting to breathe again. The dead had been mourned, the wounded were on the mend, and the survivors were rebuilding their broken lives. It would take years, maybe even decades, to fix everything. But humanity had survived. No, it had done more than just survive. It had won. The Valoran invasion force was gone. After weeks of tense back and forth, Lord Vexerin had finally agreed to pull all of his remaining soldiers and ships off the planet. In exchange, Earth released the Valoran prisoners of war and returned some of their captured technology. It was not a generous deal for the invaders, but they were in no position to argue. Their situation was completely hopeless. Their home world was in political turmoil, and their massive empire was starting to show cracks under the pressure. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the observation deck of a rebuilt military base in Geneva, watching the very last Valoran transport ship climb into the sky. It rose up through the clouds and vanished into the blackness of space, carrying the final remnants of the invasion away from her world for good. "It's over," her aide said quietly beside her. "The war is over," Chen Wei agreed. "But the changes, they're just getting started. We're not the same people we were 6 months ago. We now know for a fact that we are not alone, and we know there are powers out there that see us as nothing more than a bug to be squashed. And now, she added, her voice hardening like steel, we know that we can fight them. So what's next? Her aide asked. Now, we rebuild, we prepare, and we make damn sure that no one ever gets the bright idea to invade our home again. On Nexar Prime, the Galactic Council was also struggling with the new reality. The impossible attack had sent shockwaves across the entire galaxy. For thousands of years, the great powers had believed their home systems were untouchable. The humans had just proven them all wrong. If a species that had barely even left its own solar system could bring the mighty Valoran Dominion to its knees, then nobody was truly safe. Some species reacted with fear, beefing up their defenses and getting ready for wars they hoped would never happen. Others reacted with overwhelming curiosity. They started studying humanity, trying to understand how such a supposedly backward species had achieved the impossible. And some reacted with a little flicker of hope. All across the galaxy, there were worlds that had been conquered and oppressed by the major powers. They had always just accepted their fate, believing that any kind of resistance was pointless. But now, they saw that resistance was possible. Now, they had a new example to look up to. In the quiet corners of 100 different worlds, whispers began to spread about the humans from that little blue planet called Earth. The people who refused to give up. The people who fought back and won. High Arbiter Solana called the council to order for what would turn out to be one of the most important sessions in galactic history. We are gathered here, she announced, to discuss the formal request submitted by the government of Earth. They have asked for recognition as a sovereign interstellar species and for full membership in this galactic council. The new Valoran ambassador, the old one having been sent home in disgrace, leaped to his feet. This is an outrage. These barbarians attacked our home world. They destroyed our fleet. They killed thousands of our people. They should be punished, not rewarded. They responded to an unprovoked invasion, Ambassador Kethvon replied calmly from his seat. They defended themselves against an act of aggression that this very council signed off on. If anyone in this room deserves to be punished, it's the Dominion for starting this pointless war in the first place. The Dominion argued it was just using its rights under galactic law, a law that allows for the conquest of so-called primitive species, but it doesn't demand it. The Dominion made the choice to invade Earth. They chose to end the lives of millions of human beings. They started this war. All humanity did was finish it. For hours, the debate raged back and forth, rehashing the same old arguments and airing the same old complaints. But ever so slowly, the mood in the chamber began to shift. That's when Counselor Threshnak of the Hegemony, a military strategist who had been watching the war with great interest, decided to speak. I have studied the humans' military tactics in great detail, he announced. They are unlike anything I've ever seen. They adapt faster than any species I know. They innovate under pressure in ways that shouldn't be possible, he went on, and they absolutely never, ever give up. Is that supposed to be a compliment? The Valoran ambassador sneered back at him. It's meant to be a warning, Threshnak replied. If we continue to treat humans as our enemy, that's exactly what they will become. They'll keep improving their technology. They'll keep building their fleet. And sooner or later, they will be strong enough to challenge any one of us in this galaxy. Threshnak paused, letting his words sink in around the room. But if we welcome them as equals, if we offer them a seat in our galactic community, they could become our allies instead. And I think we would all much rather have humans as our friends than as our enemies. The chamber fell silent, as every representative considered what he had said. Finally, the High Arbiter Solana spoke. We will now vote on the human petition, all in favor of granting Earth full recognition and a seat on this council. One by one, the votes started trickling in. The Hegemony voted yes. The collective voted yes. Encouraged by the bigger powers, smaller systems added their support. Even a few species that had always sided with the Dominion voted yes, seeing that the galaxy's balance of power was changing right before their very eyes. When the final count was in, the result was clear. Earth would be recognized. Humanity was getting a seat at the table. "The motion carries," Solana announced. Her voice was perfectly neutral, but anyone who knew her well might have seen a tiny flicker of respect in her eyes. "Earth is hereby granted provisional membership in the Galactic Council. A formal ceremony will be held to welcome their representative." That ceremony took place 3 weeks later. Dr. Amara Okonkwo was chosen as Earth's representative. She was a brilliant xenolinguist who had spent her entire life dreaming of the day humanity would finally make contact with other intelligent life. The brutal invasion wasn't anything like the first contact she had imagined, but she was determined to turn this nightmare into a brand new beginning. She stood before the council, wearing a simple black suit, her dark skin glowing in the chamber's lights. Behind her, a hologram of Earth spun slowly, a beautiful blue and green jewel that had come so very close to being shattered. "It is an honor to be here today," she started, her voice steady and strong. "It's an honor to represent my entire species before this council. But I'm not going to pretend this is purely a celebration." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the alien faces before her. Some looked intrigued, some looked hostile, and many were completely unreadable. 6 months ago, a fleet from the Valoran Dominion assaulted my home. They showed up without a word, without any attempt to communicate, giving us zero chance to avoid a war. They slaughtered millions of my people. They flattened our cities. They did everything in their power to erase us from existence. She let the weight of that statement settle in the silent chamber. But we are still here. Not because we were stronger, and certainly not because our technology was better. We survived because we simply refused to die. We survived because every last human on our planet, from our brilliant scientists to our farmers in the fields, and even our children, found a way to resist. We survived because survival is what we do. The room was utterly still. I'm not here to issue threats to this council. I'm not here to demand vengeance. I'm here because what humanity wants is incredibly simple. We want to be left alone. We want the chance to build our lives, to raise our children, and to explore the cosmos at our own pace. We have no interest in conquering anyone. We have no ambition to rule anyone. She locked eyes with the Valoran ambassador, who shifted uncomfortably under her intense stare. But let me be perfectly clear. We will never again stand by and let someone else try to conquer us. That is the lesson this war has taught us. That is the message humanity is broadcasting to the entire galaxy. Leave us be, and we will be the greatest friends you've ever had. But if you come for us, we will become the nightmare you can never wake up from. She turned her gaze back to the council as a whole. I've been told this council was created to promote peace and cooperation between the varied species of the galaxy. I've been told it was founded on principles of fairness and justice. If that is true, then humanity has a place here. We believe in peace. We believe in working together. We believe different peoples can coexist without trying to annihilate each other. But we have also learned that peace must be defended. We believe the strong have no right to prey upon the weak. We believe that every single species, no matter how small or how new they are to the stars, has earned the right to decide its own fate. She paused, gathering her strength for her final words. I'm asking this council to welcome Earth, not just as another member, but as a true partner. I am asking for your help to rebuild what we've lost and to share your wisdom with us. In return, we will share everything we have to offer, our knowledge, our art, our boundless creativity, and our stubborn refusal to give up on problems that everyone else says are impossible. Humanity has been through a crash course these last 6 months. We've learned we are not alone. We've learned that the universe is a far more dangerous place than we ever imagined. But the most important thing we learned is that we are so much tougher than we ever knew. We have learned that we can stand against any challenge, overcome any hurdle, and defeat any foe. The galaxy may not have wanted humanity to join its star-faring community, but like it or not, we have arrived, and we are here to stay. Dr. Okonkwo concluded her speech and stood in the echoing silence, awaiting their judgment. For what felt like an age, no one said a word. Then, Counselor Threshnack rose to his feet. He crossed the vast chamber until he stood directly before the human delegate. His colossal, armored form dwarfed her, but she didn't so much as flinch. "The hegemony welcomes humanity to the Galactic Council," he rumbled in a deep, formal voice. Then, speaking more softly, he added, "And I personally welcome you. Any species that can fight as you have has earned my deepest respect." Ambassador Keth Varan was the next to rise. "The collective also welcomes humanity. We hope that this day will be the beginning of a long and prosperous friendship." One by one, the other representatives stood and offered their greetings. Even the Valoran ambassador, his voice dripping with ice and his words clipped, was forced to recognize Earth's new standing. After the ceremony was over, Dr. Okonkwo walked out of the chamber to a large viewport that looked out over the station's immense docking bay. 3 ships hung in the void, looking like battered toys next to the majestic vessels of the other races: the Defiance, the Vengeance, and a newly finished ship christened the Hope. By galactic standards, they weren't much to look at. They were held together with makeshift patches and raw, human determination. Their crews were composed of people who had learned to pilot starships in a matter of weeks, not the decades of training others received. But they were ours. They were human, and they were a symbol of everything our world had accomplished in 6 short months. Captain Maria Santos appeared at her side, looking tired but radiating pride. "So what's the verdict?" she asked. "They voted us in," Dr. Okonkwo said simply. "We are officially members of the Galactic Council." "And you trust them?" Maria pressed. "Not for a second. But they don't trust us either. Trust is going to have to be earned on both sides of the table." She stared out at the tiny human fleet against the blackness of space. "We have a very long journey ahead. We have to rebuild our world, construct a real fleet, and train an entirely new generation of soldiers and scientists. We have to make ourselves so powerful that nobody would ever dream of attacking us again." "That's a project that will take years," Maria noted. "Yes, it will, but we humans are pretty good when it comes to long-term projects. We've built civilizations from scratch that have lasted for thousands of years. We can do this." Santos nodded slowly. "I suppose you're right. We survived a full-scale alien invasion with nothing but guts and duct tape. Building a galactic power should be a walk in the park compared to that." To her own surprise, Dr. Okonkwo let out a genuine laugh. It was the first time she'd laughed in months. "Much easier," she agreed. "We might even get some sleep now and then." They stood together in silence for a while, just watching the stars that had once seemed so impossibly distant. Behind them, the Galactic Council was already scrambling to adapt to this new piece on the board. Alliances were being re-examined, treaties were being discreetly redrafted. The balance of power, stable for millennia, was suddenly unpredictable. And no one, anywhere, knew what tomorrow would hold. Humanity had finally stepped onto the galactic stage, not as conquerors, not as victims, but as equals. And somewhere, in a little cafe in Paris, on a street that had been rubble just months ago and was now being rebuilt, a young girl looked up into the night sky and pointed. "Mommy," she asked, "will I get to go up there one day?" Her mother smiled, a warmth spreading across her face as she looked at everything they had fought for, everything they had won, and all the open doors that lay ahead. "Yes, my love," she whispered. "Someday you will. And so will we." The stars above weren't just cold, distant lights anymore. They were destinations. They were promises. Humanity was finally ready to meet its neighbors. The universe would never be the same.